This is not about classic war.
Mm-hmm.
They are bombing citizens, cities, all nights, every night, on purpose, because they think that this is the best way to make Ukrainians accept capitulation.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to have today Romain Quinoux. Did I pronounce it right?
Perfectly.
Romain is the co-founder of the think tank Eurocreative, and he's based in Brussels, and he is also an independent consultant. And he is very active in the pro-Ukrainian community in France, especially. You're my very first interview partner from France. Really great to meet today on Talk for Ukraine.
Well, that's an honor to be the first French, and thanks a lot for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Romain. Probably you have the same problems in France as we do in Germany. The Russian propaganda is very, very strong here in Germany. How is it in France?
Well, no surprise, the Russian propaganda in France is strong. And we know it, we see it, we feel it. This is a concern for the government, of course, and I can detail that a bit, but I would like also in the same time to remind something to our audience. And maybe it's not clear because we talk about Russian propaganda in France, and of course France is one of the big targets in Europe for different reasons. But I have to say that the French population, the French citizens, have evolved since 2014. Of course, in France, in Paris, we forget to say that the war in Ukraine started in 2014. People think mostly about 2022 and the full-scale invasion, but yeah, the war has been started since more than a decade. And I can tell you that in France, back in 2014, people struggled to understand what Ukraine was, what was the reasons of this war, who was the good guy and the bad guys, to be honest. And now it's not the case anymore. And we can pray also to some extent the success of our political parties, mostly from the government and a few parties from the opposition, because they were able to be clear and to say that Russia is the invader, Ukraine is the victim, and this is how the situation is. And we can see that today France is still on the good side when it comes to societal support. French citizens are still, even if the support is decreasing, as in all of the countries in Europe, in the West, French are still on the good side when it comes to support Ukraine. It's difficult, it's painful, but still, the French people know on which side of the history they want to be and they want to put France. So this is something I have to remind before to tell you that, yes, indeed, Russian propaganda is very strong, unfortunately. But Russian propaganda is strong because we are weak. And this is one of the issues that we are facing today. Russia is playing on our divisions, and France is a very divided country at the societal level, especially. And the problem is that the Russians know us better than we know them. So they know how to put and to insist on the points that are painful to us. Let's just talk about one example. This Russian propaganda try to lead hybrid attacks against France. And I can mention, for example, all the things that happen in the context of the Israel against Palestine war. And you can see that they've been trying to play with the French divisions on this topic, because this is a highly divided topic in France. Our society is completely divided on this issue. Our politicians are making debates about this continuously. So you can see that, for example, the Russians paid some random guys from Central Eastern Europe to lead some actions that were disturbing for the French people and for the French media. And you can see, for example, they throw some paint on synagogues. They paint some David stars on our walls. And the French initial reaction was to say that it's not normal. Are you against? Are you in favor of this type of things? But it was not something from within our society. It was an external action that was aimed at dividing our society. And the first reaction was a political debate. It was not to say that it might be external, it might be the Russians trying to divide our society. So I think that, it's still very difficult for France to cope with the Russian propaganda, because we, for a long time, didn't understand that Russian propaganda was active in France. And maybe just to finish on this, not to be too long, but I think it's a very important topic for us. in France now we can see that there is competence, there is expertise to deal with Russian propaganda or foreign interferences. We are able to identify, for example, very precisely, and I think that some institutions such as Viginum now has European, pan-European reputation. For example, they've been very active into analyzing the Romanian elections, things like this. So they are very good in identifying the trends, the foreign interferences from Russia and everywhere else. But the problem is that it's good to identify, but it's better to protect. And we have no way at the moment to protect fully our populations against Russian propaganda. And Russian propaganda is active on many different levels in France. We can mention the politics, and I'm sure that we will be able to dig into this because France is unfortunately an interesting case where many political parties are pro-Russian or have some pro-Russian sensibilities. It is active also on the economics, and you can see a lot in the debate, especially from a few business people, that sanctions are bad, that France has lost a good economic partner as Russia. Well, this is not really true. Russia has never been a strong economic partner for France, never in the top 10, to be honest, even in the best years. So, but it's true that Russia was focusing on very important, very big companies, such as oil, banking, retail. And so they had some influence because those big guys in the French economics lost something, but it's not the French economy. It's a few business entrepreneurs that were very much invited to Russia to make this business deal and sometimes didn't come back. Unfortunately, we have to say that. We remember the strange death of Christophe de Margerie. Russia is also very influential in societal, cultural level, and it's not from yesterday. It has been the case for centuries and centuries that, you know, Russians have been penetrating our intellectual and cultural elite, saying that they are one of the most brilliant country when it comes to arts. Well, there are a few artists that have been, you know, quite influential, quite popular in Western Europe and in the West mostly. But let's put it that way, we should not exaggerate it. And you have still in country like France, many people in the intellectual and the cultural sector who are praising the Russian as one of the closest intimate partner of France when it comes to culture. I think it's pretty wrong, to be honest. And the last one is less discussed and it's a bit more controversial, but it explains why Russian propaganda is deep inside. I think the Russians have been able to spread some messages in our society because they are influential at the educational sector on two ways. First way is that they've been able to circulate cliché about the Slavic and about the Russians, saying that, you know, these are those guys from the cold lands, quite violent, quite dangerous, so you don't want to mess with a Slavic guy and you don't want to mess with a Russian because they, on purpose, created this weird and porous barrier between Slavic and Russians, and they are playing on this on purpose. And the second thing, sorry to say, but we have an education system, especially when it comes to history, that is not 100% objective. And here I want to talk about the influence of communist and far left political forces on our education system after the Second World War, and especially when it comes to analysis of the Second World War. Because yes, unfortunately in France, you have some part of the historical program where we have difficulties to put Stalin's USSR on the same level as Nazi Germany, which means that, you know, we have an imbalance when it comes to assessing the Russian crimes and the Soviet crimes before as well, during and after the Second World War. And I think this is a problem because we still have some part of the society, and especially those people highly educated, which have a problem to mention communist and Soviet crimes. And there is an imbalance that is problematic.
This is very interesting what you just told, Romain, because everything what you just said, we could adapt it one-on-one on Germany. Exactly. Absolutely. So is there a system, and it's our own inability. When you mention, for example, when you mention the lack of historical knowledge, we have the same in Germany. Germany is it's different. We have been the bad guys in the Second World War. We had Adolf Hitler, but we lost the war. So we focus now on ourselves, and we say in Germany, yeah, have been guilty. We have been treated the whole world very badly, and also the Soviet Union, the Russians. That's the same for us. Yeah. So there's a lack of knowledge of history, and the other thing is that the cultural debate, those things you mentioned about culture, some artists they are over exaggerated, and that made me think of the after the full scale invasion, it was very clear who's the bad guys. But now, 3.5 years later, everything is vanishing somehow in the mist again. And for example, we have seen this Russian singer, opera singer Anna Netrebko. She was completely banned from German theaters. I don't know how it was in France, but now she's coming back somehow on the stage. It's incredible. She's still pro-Russian. She's still pro-Putin. She is somehow camouflaged, and she says, "Yes, I'm an artist. I'm not political. This is art. This is not politics." And so we have really to be very clear that they didn't change. That was really interesting what you told me. What I want to ask you: how is it possible that parties like Rassemblement National, or in Germany the AfD, who are or the Wagenknecht Party BFSW, that those parties, they, even if they are pro-Russian, that they are rising. They are not just staying where they are rising. So this. How do you explain this, Romain?
Well, I think that, they try to. So there are two things I would say. That the first is that those parties have raised in popularity, not necessarily for their foreign policy positions. And I think that mostly they are successful because they are able to talk to a part and a more and more important part of our societies, because they are basically playing on topics that are very important to the citizens, and where our traditional elite, traditional political parties are not able to deliver. Let's be honest and let's be realistic. This is the case in France, this is the case in Germany. Our politicians are not able to deliver on security, domestic security I mentioned here, especially all those questions linked to migration, illegal migration. Second is about prosperity. Both populations in Germany or in France can see clearly that the perspectives for their own individual, and I insist on this word, individual wealth, are not terrible, because the country, our countries both are experiencing some difficulties at the economic industrial level, especially for France for many years, but Germany now is in the same situation after 2022, because its own model is now questioned, and they have to change. So this is a problem. And there is also this type of cultural insecurity, I guess. And they are playing a lot, those parties, on this, saying that it was better before, that our society has changed. There is this woke movement, for example, that they are very vocal about. And I think that those parties have been capitalizing on these insecurities, and people believe that change can go through them. Is it true or not? People don't really know, and it doesn't matter, to be honest, because they've tried many solutions. They voted to the left, they voted to the right, sometimes they voted to the center, sometimes, and most of the time, they abstained, and nothing changed. So why not to try a more radical solution? Because after all, this is the only more or less choice that they haven't tested. And even if they don't believe in it, at least they will try this option. So I think this is how you have the national rally that is increasing. And this is not so much about pro-Russian or not pro-Russian. People know, people remember the photos of Marine Le Pen and Vladimir Putin a few years ago. People remember the declarations of Marine Le Pen on many Russian aggressions, that she was saying that Putin was only defending itself. So, the so-called patriots being not patriotic at all, because they kind of support, at least blankly, another country that is at war with our country, because this is the reality right now. But truth to be said, Marine Le Pen, as well as Jordan Bardella, because now we have to mention both of them, because Jordan Bardella is the president of the political party.
Yes,
and this is important because now it's more and more visible. they try to, for a number of years, they try to legitimize themselves, saying that they are a political party that is able to rule. So they were less radical on their domestic positions, but they tried also to just decrease their positions when it comes to Russia. Of course, in 2022, it was not good to have pictures of Le Pen and Putin because people were a bit careful about this, but people tend to forget, and people say that, this is not anymore 3 years after the full-scale invasion. This is not anymore the most important topic. And Marine Le Pen, I would say, also with Jordan Bardella, they had a clever technique, which was basically to say that, they are not supporting Russia, not at all. They are just supporting peace. And, this pro-peace line that Viktor Orban has been mastering for a number of years. I think that the National Rally tried to do that as well. They gave also some clear statements saying that they support Ukraine because Ukraine is the victim. Doesn't mean that they want France to be engaged or not, but they have a reality where they know that even the electorate is split on the issue, so they cannot support Russia. And if they want to gain power, they need to enlarge the electorate. And if they want to enlarge their electorate, they need to be at least ambiguous on their support towards Ukraine, Russia. So this is a situation where they've been able to gain power. And if we look at the French political spectrum, frankly speaking, they are not the only one to be those so-called pro-Russian party. And most of the people have been trying to shut up on this for the past 3 years. But now you can see that they are more and more vocal, especially with the rise of Donald Trump in the international affairs, because now there is the possibility to say that we told you it was not good to support Ukraine. Now we need to find a way to find solutions with Russia, which means peace, and tomorrow back to business. And this is where I think it's very dangerous. This is what you mentioned in your last question. The back to business things. Yes, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, and it will be difficult to deal with that for the Ukrainians, but you have more and more voices appealing for being back to the business. And of course, the fringe parties will be the first to launch this offensive, but you will have, unfortunately, also traditional parties will follow suit, because this is how it becomes clearer and clearer.
Yeah, the strength of those pro-Russian parties is the weakness of the other parties. And I'm asking myself, when you mention the word peace, everybody has something different in it. And in fact, when the pro-Russian parties say peace, they mean in reality they mean capitulation.
Absolutely.
And this is absolutely the worst thing they can do, to use this word peace nowadays. We also always should use the real words, capitulation. And the other thing is, Russia is at war also with us. It's the hybrid war, and we are not away from the war. I ask myself, why don't the established parties, why don't they just better use this narrative? I also don't like the word narrative. Why don't they use this description that Putin is at war with us, and those parties who support Putin, or the so-called peace on Putin's side, that they are in fact they are pro-Russian, and they are the so-called useful idiots, what the KGB called his proxies in the West, and that they are proxies. Why don't our parties more emphasize on this fact that what is at stake? Do you have any explanation?
I think our political parties the traditional ones are in a catch-22 situation, which means that they know the dangerosity and the danger. They know the danger, right? Mm-hmm. They know the danger about Russia and the threat on European security, because they are convinced, even in Western Europe, that this is not just about Ukraine, and that Russia has continental ambitions and not just revisionist policies towards Ukraine. And at the same time, they know that they are not in a good position when it comes to national politics. So they are trying to do the minimum thing to support Ukraine, to face Russia. But at the same time, they don't want to lose power. And I think this is where we have a big danger, because we are not doing enough for Ukraine. And you can see, for example, the coalition of willing. The coalition of willing is not based on concrete developments. It's based on appeasement towards Mr. Trump. And it's based on fake assumption that there might be a ceasefire. There won't be a ceasefire in the next few months or even years, because this is not what Putin's want, and this is not what the basis of negotiation is. This is not about the ceasefire. So you can see that they have developed a narrative, as you say, that is minimum, saying that we support Ukraine, but at the same time, we don't want to have this narrative that is threatening our own political positions, because they know that they are in difficult ways, they are in difficult positions at home, and that this narrative of Europeans being engaged in supporting Ukraine can lead to some people, some fringe anti-democratic party, to say that they are basically supporting war and they are bringing the Europeans to war. And so I think that they are basically trapped, our political elites, our traditional parties, because on one side they want to help Ukraine, on the other side they don't want to lose the support of their population, because their population can be afraid by war, also can be afraid that our countries will spend more money on Ukraine, on supporting Ukraine, than spending money on finding back prosperity, on helping lower classes in France or in other countries. So I think that our political elites, our traditional political parties, can lose everything. First is not to do enough for Ukraine and face a bigger, larger war in the next 3 to 5 years in Europe, in the European Union, and at the same time losing power. So that would be the catastrophic scenario. And I'm sure that this is what Vladimir Putin wants and is betting on. This is why he's not negotiating. He knows that Europe will be probably weaker in a few years, especially because countries like France or Germany can switch politically. And this is what he's betting on. Now he's just trying to maintain a position in Ukraine, advance little by little, tire the Ukrainians, tire the French, the Europeans, because they know that support is exhausting for our populations, because our populations are not resilient. And at the same time, he believes that this situation, this blocked situation, this frustration for Western Europeans will lead to political change. And he's betting on the victory of Marine Le Pen and the National Rally in 2027, because he believes, rightly so, that if our countries, big enough, the biggest political, economic, military powers in Europe, are switching to the extreme right, are switching to pro-Russian party, even if the rhetoric on pro-Russia has been softened, this will be a game changer for Putin in Europe. And he knows that. And the problem is that our population tend to forget the roots of our extremist parties. This is not just about being radical and anti-system when it comes to migration, when it comes to economics. It's also a party that is affiliated to foreign power. This is proven by this links, financial links at least, and this is very dangerous.
Yeah, this is in fact very dangerous. And I see it like this, that we have only a little time window of about maybe 2 years or 3 years until the next elections. And when, as you mentioned, they will fall, then it's lost. This is the game changer. In the United States, Putin has already won when he helped Donald Trump to become president again. So this leads me again to the question, why is the perception of the people just so zero? They don't understand what is at stake, and that means, do our politicians, do our media, do they do their job well, or shouldn't they really start thinking strategically and see, if you don't act now completely strategically, then you will lose everything in 2 years. Then we have war also in that. I cannot describe it.
No, absolutely. And I think that unfortunately, Ukraine war and the suffering of Ukrainians, by suffering, I mean the killings of Ukrainians daily. We are talking about kids, women's, citizens being killed on a daily basis because Russia is bombing cities. They are not bombing, military field. This is not about classic war. They are bombing citizens, cities, all nights, every night, on purpose, and because they think that this is the best way to make Ukrainians accept capitulation. However, the best way to make Ukrainians accept capitulation is to convince the US as well as Europeans, that Ukraine has to capitulate. And this is where, unfortunately, this is dangerous, because Russia has understood that our societies are very fragile, our democracies are very fragile, and unfortunately, Ukraine has been entering a daily communication spirit in countries like France, which is that basically, it's just one line in the headlines. Oh, and by the way, 10 people, including 5 children, have been killed today. And, this is part of a daily news bulletin, and people are not shocked anymore. I remember very well, and I was almost surprised that French people were so shocked about the first days of large-scale invasion, because they didn't expect that. Now they expect that Ukraine is not anymore so close to us. It's a country that is European and that French people understand now, which they didn't 10 years ago. But, it's still far away. It's not. It's 3 hours by plane. And unfortunately, we cannot use plane anymore in Ukraine because Russia would shoot them down. So, this is something that we have to remind every day. But yeah, I think that both politicians and media are not treating that topic well. When it comes to media, this is now about trying to find, and I understand, media is about an economic market, and it's not the best and the healthy economic market at the moment. So they always try to catch some audience. And the problem is that for 3 years, the war has been raging, and you don't have so much audience when it comes to Ukraine war. And so what they try to do is to find ways to make it attractive. So you will not invite just people defending Ukraine. If you want to have audience, then you will try to find people being mostly on the Russian side and people being mostly on the Ukrainian side, and you will try to raise some debates. I'm not saying that you invite always some pro-Russian, but yes, from time to time in the French media, you can see representative of the Russian embassy, for example, which is crazy to hear, but this is how it's being done, because in France at the moment, media would like to have debate, because this is the only way to make some attractivity in the Ukraine war debates, unfortunately. When it comes to politicians, once again, they are trying to save themselves at the moment, all the traditional political parties. So what they do is basically they follow public opinion and they adapt their communication into this. So if the French public opinion is in support of Ukraine, they will be more vocal on this. And you can see that Macron has tried a lot of gambling when it's coming to Ukraine. So, this appeal to potential boots on the ground was first from Emmanuel Macron. And it's not a hazard, because he wanted to take back the opportunity, the leadership in Europe, but also he knew that French people were in majority, and at least on the part of its electorate, were able to listen to this kind of words, because they see France as a country that should be in the leading position and not just waiting. So, but in the same time, you have many political parties that are very shy when it comes to Ukraine, and I'm thinking here about mostly on the right side, because they think that it can be dangerous for their own public opinions to be too vocal on this, because their electorate is unclear about this. Has been affected by some Russian propaganda, so they stay very on the cautious side, and I don't think they should do that. I think that all political parties should take a clear stand and should say that we have to support Ukraine, because if we don't support Ukraine, this will happen. And what will happen is simple: if we don't support Ukraine today, we risk a major war on the European continent in the 3 to 5 years for the less optimistic, and maybe in the next decade for the more optimistic people and analysts. So sorry to say, we have no choice today than to act as Europeans, and our politicians should be clear on this. But as you know, it's difficult for a politician which is in campaign, which is the basic state of French politics today, being every day on campaign. It's difficult to promise to your citizens that you are campaigning for future war and you are campaigning for those sufferings. So unfortunately, people are not aligned there with the political realities and the geopolitical realities, especially.
Romain, I'm thinking every day about how can we explain those things in an easy way that the easy people, not the easy people, the ordinary people understand it, and that they feel it, and that they don't, that they are aware of this danger, what you just described. So it's a question of our media, it's a question of our politicians, but it has to be easy that everybody understands it. And the funny thing is that the far right parties, the extremist parties, the populist parties, they always have easy answers on difficult questions. Put away all the migrants, then we have get rid of this problem. And Russia's war against Ukraine is not our war, and so they have always easy answers. And but those answers are they are not the good answers. So it's our task to explain this to the people, but very quickly. We don't have a lot of time. Let's talk about the media again. How is it in France? Because in Germany, it's like this, that the people, many of those people who support Russia, they have lost the faith in the media and the traditional media. How is it in France?
No, that's the same. That's the same. And I have to say that, very few media were willing before 2022 to talk about international affairs. In France, generally, you talk about France. You don't have many news when it comes to international affairs or European affairs, only in specific channels such as France 24, which is basically the French media outlet that we broadcast outside of France. But in the national media, private or public, you don't have much news when it comes to international affairs. So that has changed because people get some interest because they were very scared first about the large-scale invasion of Ukraine, and then they were willing to understand better. And I think that this is a positive point. And, people in France have been following more and more the geopolitical developments. There is both interest and there is both anxiety about this. And I think that we made a positive development there, that we are able now to have complete emissions multiple shows where international affairs are at the center of the stage. That being said, it's true that our media are less and less followed by people. And one of the most important issues that we have to face is that especially the young generation is following social media. And on social media, this information is spreading, right? It's spreading because it's uncontrolled, and most of the social networks are not willing to control it. And we have this big fight now between Washington and Brussels on how to control it. And unfortunately, we are not there yet. I think that it's a difficult question because it touches the essence of democracy, of the free speech, and I think that unfortunately some players, especially from the US, have been tricking the debate because they are talking of free speech when they don't have in mind free speech. They have in mind authorization of our democracies, which can lead to the end of democracy. So I think this is a very dangerous and tricky debate. But I think in the same time, we've been completely irresponsible in dealing with some social networks that have been spreading around over the past few years. I will give you two examples. The first one is Telegram. Telegram is a hub of disinformation because one of its strengths is to say that we cannot moderate it, that the platform doesn't want to moderate it. Well, fair enough. It can be easy for this free speech, but at the same time, you have some illegal things happening on Telegram, and it is about drug dealing, for example, but this is also about coordination of Russian sabotages all across Europe. And here, I think that the French authorities have been, completely unaware about the fact that someone like Pavel Durov might not have been these free fighters fighting Russia and fighting the Kremlin. But this is one of the things, and I can tell you that for a long time, and this is less and less the case, but for a long time, everyone in the National Assembly in France was using Telegram. Everyone.
Wow.
Including the members of parliament. So, this gives you a sense of the problems that we are facing. Second example is TikTok. And, France is not the only country there that is facing problems with TikTok. But how is it possible that we think that we will save our democracy if TikTok is one of the main social media that is used, especially by our kids? And it is not about the free speech to regulate TikTok. It is about protecting our democracy. And I think that we should open the debate. It's not an easy debate. I understand that. We should always care for safeguarding the free speech, but leaving TikTok alone and leaving TikTok modeling our generations or future generations is not about democracy. It's about letting a foreign power an authoritarian foreign power, a communist foreign power, deciding on what our children will look. And I think that France understood it, because when we had those riots back in 2023 in France, they saw that the algorithm were manipulated by some people behind TikTok. Yes, because Beijing wanted to have more troubles in France. This is how it is. We experienced the same thing with the riots in New Caledonia, when we saw that TikTok once again was manipulating the algorithm because they wanted to have more noise, more tensions, and we can see that. So I think that after these two experiences, France should have led the fight in banning TikTok. And it's not about controlling free speech, it's about saving free speech, because you cannot put on the same side the ability and the freedom of people to speak their mind, which they can do as long as they respect the law, and a company which is based in China, which is controlled by the CCP, to decide what should be seen or not seen by French young generations.
Yeah.
This is simply unacceptable. And this is not a debate about free speech. This is a debate about protecting our democracy. So I hope that our politicians will be better in this, because the debate has been mostly on should we authorize kids to watch on their phone during high school. And I think this is not the proper debate. The proper debate is to put back control on this foreign tools that are not about expressing ways for citizens. This is about controlling the future narratives of our citizens, and this is a big topic, and it's not tackled enough, especially when it comes to countering disinformation.
Yeah, fantastic. You just mentioned those two platforms. The third one would be the former Twitter, which is called now X, which is now in the hands of Elon Musk. They're also completely manipulating the opinions. And so what would be your solution? Just regulating those platforms is not possible because they don't belong us. So banning is the only solution, would it be? Or what would you suggest, Romain?
Well, I have no problem to be in favor of banning some social media which are based and controlled, or at least influenced by countries which are at war or which are in global competition with us. So yes, I think this is something that should be done as soon as possible, because those are the tools of our future defeats and of basically, again, digging into the fractures of our society. Our societies are resilient, but they are facing a lot of divisions, and those tools are really fueling the fire, and this is the problem.
I mean, we have Europe. That is a very strong entity of economical power and democracy. It's a great place to live here. It's worth to guard it, to save it, to rescue it. And but we have we have really big problems, as we mentioned in our interview. And one of the main problems is that the security question that was in the hands of the United States, who was leading NATO, and NATO was protecting Europe and the freedom of democracies. And that is gone now. NATO is gone because it is the security of NATO is gone because Donald Trump is there. He puts away all the credibility. So how can now I have a feeling that we Europeans, we are the last ones here on the democratic side, and also including Australia and South Korea and New Zealand. And so there are some democracies, but we are on the back. How can we protect democracy? How can we make ourselves strong? What do we need, Romain?
So maybe just to come back to the beginning of your question, and then after I can try to answer to this 1 million question. But yeah, people are not happy. Well, yes, especially as French, we know that grass is always greener elsewhere, and we have this tendency to complain on a daily basis, but because we are exigent, and I think that this is important to be exigent, especially in a democracy, to do better and better and better. But the problem is that this state of mind is also a problem because it makes us weaker and less resilient, right? So we need to be demanding to our leaders, to our democracy, to our political parties, but at the same time, we need to understand that, well, sometimes the situation is not perfect and we need to make some sacrifices. And here, I don't think that we are asking French citizens a lot of sacrifices when we say to them that we need to make some reforms to be sure that we can pay our future. We have to ask our older generation to make sacrifices because the young generation will pay the price, will not be able to have a decent economy, will not be able to have a decent army, etc., etc. And I think that, you know, if the society is positive, looking forward and all these things, we should be able to find a solution. Unfortunately, at France at the moment, I think we have a deep societal crisis, which we need to fix as soon as possible, because this is absolutely no time to have a societal crisis. But still, I wanted just to make a comment on NATO. I don't think NATO is over. I think that the evolution of the transatlantic alliance is more rapid than we are willing to accept it. The US has always been clear that they want to withdraw from Europe. It's been the case for the past decade. They said it, they mentioned it, they warned us, and we did nothing to counter that. So yes, of course, now we are afraid of having Donald Trump waking up the wrong way and say like, okay, then fuck you off. I will just get my guys and bring them back. And I think that this is the worst situation we can expect, because we are totally dependent on what Trump could say, because we didn't do the job enough. We didn't prepare for this kind of scenarios. But I can remember very well, even if I was quite young at that time, Barack Obama was already saying that there was a pivot, that the US were interested mainly in Asia and the Europeans should take care of Europe. So this is the situation right now. And to complement my example, the fact that Article 5 has been the backbone of European security, it was convenient to anyone, because the best way to be sure that Article 5 is a guarantee is to not talk about this. It's not to face the potential utility of it. So as long as you don't need to implement Article 5, you trust Article 5. The day you have to implement it, you're not sure that everyone will be on the same page. And especially, you're not sure that the US will do the job. And here, it's not to disrespect the US and our partnership. We know as Europeans, especially as French, what we owe to our American friends, to our American partners. But let's not forget that we started both the First World War as well as the Second World War when we were occupied by the Nazis, Germans. We remember that we were alone, right? And then the American came. But at the beginning, we were alone. So we need to face this situation where the US might not be interested in our wars, and we need to find solutions. And I think that here we've been unable to, as Europeans collectively, except a few countries that have been serious about defense spending, about defense strengthening. I mentioned here the Nordic Baltic, because this is really where the countries have been serious since 2022. A few countries have been serious since, the 2010s. I mentioned here mostly countries from the eastern flank, Poland, again, the Baltic states. You can mention Greece also, because they have a specific, geography, but the rest has been unserious. Let's face it. And we still do too little. I mean, when we are facing a full-scale war in Europe, this is not serious. We are not able to upgrade. And what to do for democracy? I mean, this is, as I said, the 1 million question. But we should be able to, our politicians, our society should be able to bridge domestic interest as well as international interest, because this is what we face. If tomorrow there is a full-scale war, not just in Ukraine, but in Europe, it will threaten our security. So it means it will threaten our prosperity, and it will threaten our liberty. So are we willing to sacrifice for this If yes, then we need to find the solutions. If not, this will be very difficult because at the end we will lose everything. And I think this is not what our citizens are understanding right now in all of the countries, especially in Western Europe, because still our debates, our lives are made on short-term basis, not on long-term basis. So you prefer to fight for, the pension reform, saying that you don't want to work in 30, 40 years, you don't want to work 6 months more. But at the same time, this is a topic that should be put in the long term. If you want to have a pension, then you need to accept this right now. And this is the tricky thing, that our politicians are just following a cycle of communication where they are chasing citizens which are focused on daily basis, and they are adapting to the daily basis. So they are always talking about short term, impossible to put our issues, our challenges, which are challenges for the 21st century, not for tomorrow, but really for the 21st century. If we lose Ukraine's war, we will suffer the consequences for the world century. But that they are unable to do. So I think two things are very important. First, we already talked about this, is to adapt democracy to the 21st century, and especially here for example, with the social media, finding a way to have more to reduce the possibilities of our enemies to influence our democracies. And the second, which is extremely important, is to rebuild the trust between citizens and institutions and political parties. Because at the moment, you can see that in the countries where the trust is low, there is threat to the rise of extremist parties, and there is an ability to make decisions because our countries are blocked. So I think the most important thing is to rebuild the trust. How to do it? Probably it will vary from different countries, but I think that we should put back the reality in our discussions. Politicians need to be clear on the reality. They need to be very honest about the situation. We are facing dangers. We need to act. And they should act. If they act and they are put out of power, let's be it. But at least they will prepare the work and they will prepare the conditions to make something out of it.
Yeah, we need leadership in Europe, and where to get it from, that is maybe a question for the next debate, if you like. Romain, I thank you very much for your time, that you gave me the honor and pleasure to give me your insights. My name is Christoph Müller, the host of Talk for Ukraine. Please give a like and subscribe to the channel. That's what I want to ask the audience. Thank you very much for being with us. Romain, see you the next time.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thanks for the opportunity.